Marcus Chun wiped the grease from his hands with a dirty rag, squinting at the diagnostic readout on his portable scanner. The fusion drive of the merchant vessel Stellar Wanderer was throwing error codes he'd never seen before, and he'd been fixing ships for 23 years across half the galaxy. The Zalarian captain who'd hired him had been typically arrogant, looking down his scaled snout at the human mechanic with barely concealed disgust. "Your primitive tools cannot comprehend our superior technology," Captain Veltar had sneered, his reptilian features twisted in disdain. "But I suppose even a monkey with a wrench might stumble upon the solution." Marcus had bitten back his usual sharp retort. He needed the credits, and jobs were scarce for human mechanics in this sector. The Galactic Trade Alliance considered humans little more than clever animals, useful for grunt work, but lacking the intellectual capacity for truly complex engineering. Most alien species viewed humanity as a recent addition to galactic civilization, primitive creatures who'd barely crawled out of their gravity, well, a few centuries ago. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that these same superior aliens kept calling him whenever their fancy technology broke down. Human intuition and problem-solving skills had an annoying habit of fixing things that alien logic couldn't crack. He made his way deeper into the ship's engineering section, following the intermittent power fluctuations that seemed to originate from somewhere near the aft cargo hold. The Stellar Wanderer was a Zalarian-built vessel, all sleek curves and biometallic components that pulsed with their own inner light. Beautiful in its way, but unnecessarily complex. Humans built things to be fixed. Aliens built things to be admired. The deeper he went, the stranger the readings became. His scanner was picking up energy signatures that didn't match anything in the ship's specifications. Heat patterns that suggested massive power consumption, but routed through systems that should have been dormant. Most puzzling of all, there were atmospheric readings indicating a separate life support system operating in sections that weren't supposed to be habitable. Marcus paused at a heavy blast door marked with warning symbols in multiple alien languages. His universal translator struggled with some of the older scripts, but the general meaning was clear: authorized personnel only, extreme danger, and something that roughly translated to by order of the Galactic Council. His scanner was practically screaming now, detecting massive energy fluctuations just beyond the door. The power drain that had been crippling the ship's primary systems was definitely coming from whatever lay behind that barrier. Marcus had two choices: report back to Captain Veltar that the problem was in a restricted area and face another round of species-based insults, or use his access codes to investigate. The captain had given him emergency override clearance for the entire ship, probably assuming a primitive human wouldn't be clever enough to access anything truly important. The blast door hissed open, revealing a corridor that stretched much further than the ship's blueprint suggested. Emergency lighting cast everything in a reddish glow, and the air recycling system hummed with an urgency that spoke of heavy atmospheric processing. Marcus checked his portable atmosphere reader. Oxygen levels were elevated, humidity was higher than standard, and there were trace elements he couldn't identify. As he walked deeper into the hidden section, the walls changed. The sleek Zalarian biometal gave way to something older, more primitive, but somehow more solid. Heavy blast plates and reinforced bulkheads that looked like they could withstand a direct hit from a plasma cannon. This wasn't just a hidden cargo area, it was a prison. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that definitely shouldn't have fit inside the Stellar Wanderer's hull. Marcus stood at the threshold, his mouth hanging open as he tried to process what he was seeing. The room was enormous, with a domed ceiling that stretched up into shadows. Ancient stone pillars, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, supported the weight of whatever lay above. The air itself seemed to shimmer with contained energy. And in the center of it all, chained to the largest pillar with bonds that glowed with their own inner fire, was a dragon. Not a small one either. The creature was easily 40 feet long from snout to tail, with scales that shifted color in the flickering light. Deep emerald green fading to gold along its belly, with hints of silver that caught the emergency lighting like captured starlight. Its wings, folded tight against its massive body, bore membrane patterns that resembled star charts Marcus had seen in the oldest navigation databases. The dragon's head turned toward him, and Marcus found himself staring into eyes that held the depth of space itself. Ancient, intelligent, and utterly alien despite the familiar reptilian features. There was no surprise in that gaze, no fear or anger. Just a weary resignation that spoke of years, perhaps centuries, of captivity. Well, the dragon spoke, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from the stones themselves. It appears they've finally sent someone interesting. Marcus's scanner clattered to the deck as his nerveless fingers released it. Dragons were myths, legends from humanity's own past, stories told around fires on Earth before humans had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of traveling between them. Every human culture had dragon stories, but they were just stories, weren't they? You're not real, Marcus said, his voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. The dragon's laugh was like distant thunder. Reality is far more flexible than most species believe, small engineer. Tell me, what brings a child of Earth to this floating prison? Surely the Zolarians didn't send you here intentionally. I'm fixing their ship. Marcus managed his training as a mechanic finally, overriding his shock. The power systems are failing. There's a massive drain coming from this section. Ah, the dragon nodded, a strangely human gesture from such an alien being. Yes, that would be the containment field. It requires considerable energy to maintain, especially when I'm... The creature paused, seeming to consider its words carefully. Especially when I'm feeling restless. Marcus looked more closely at the chains binding the dragon. They weren't metal in any conventional sense. Each link pulsed with the same energy signature his scanner had been tracking, and they hummed with barely contained power. The entire setup was drawing enough electricity to run a small city. They're draining the ship's fusion cores to keep you chained here, Marcus realized. Indeed, the Galactic Council takes no chances with creatures they consider dangerous. Though I suspect Captain Veltar is unaware of exactly what cargo he carries. Most are. The Council prefers their secrets to remain secret. Marcus's mind was racing. The Galactic Council was the governing body for all spacefaring civilizations, the ultimate authority that maintained order among the dozens of species that made up known space. If they were keeping a dragon imprisoned in secret, using civilian vessels as mobile prisons, then there were implications that made his head spin. What did you do? He asked. What crime gets you life imprisonment in a traveling cage? The dragon's expression shifted, becoming something that might have been amusement if the eyes weren't so sad. Crime? I committed the greatest crime imaginable, small engineer. I remembered. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, his communicator crackled to life. Captain Veltar's irritated voice filled the chamber. Human, report your status immediately. We are scheduled to depart this system in 1 standard hour. Marcus looked up at the dragon, seeing intelligence there that dwarfed anything he'd encountered in decades of travel among the stars. Whatever this creature was, whatever it had done, it didn't deserve to be chained in the dark while its prison slowly killed the ships that carried it. I'm still diagnosing the problem, Marcus replied into his communicator. It's more complex than initially apparent. I'll need additional time. You have 30 minutes, Veltar snapped. Any longer, and you forfeit payment. The connection ended, leaving Marcus alone with a creature from Legends and a choice that would change everything. He could report the power drain, claim the hidden chamber was inaccessible, collect his payment, and walk away. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. Or he could do what humans did when faced with injustice, regardless of the consequences. Marcus picked up his scanner and began examining the energy chains more closely. Tell me about these restraints, he said. How do they work? The dragon's eyes widened slightly. You would free me? You understand what the Council would do to anyone who aided my escape. I understand that keeping any sentient being chained in the dark is wrong, Marcus replied, running his scanner along one of the glowing links. And I understand that sometimes doing the right thing means ignoring the consequences. Fascinating. The dragon's voice held a note of something that might have been hope. In all my years of captivity, no one has ever suggested such a thing. The energy bonds are quantum-locked, maintained by a resonance field that draws power directly from the ship's core systems. Breaking them would require either the specific release codes known only to the Council, or what? Or someone would need to overload the containment matrix from the inside. The feedback would destroy the chains, but it would also likely kill whoever attempted it. The energy discharge alone would be equivalent to a small antimatter explosion. Marcus nodded, studying the readouts on his scanner. The resonance frequency was complex, but not impossible to disrupt. It would require precise timing and some creative rewiring, but it could be done. The survival part was trickier, but he was already forming ideas about that. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling down to examine the anchor points where the chains met the stone pillar. "I am Drakmorth the Rememberer," the dragon replied. "And you, brave engineer, what are you called?" "Marcus Chun." "And Drakmorth? Why get these chains off you? What exactly are you going to remember?" The dragon's smile revealed teeth like crystal daggers, but there was nothing threatening in the expression. "Everything, Marcus Chun of Earth. I'm going to remember everything they try to make the galaxy forget, starting with the truth about your species." Marcus's hands stilled on a scanner. "What truth?" "The truth about why they fear you so much. The truth about what humans really are, and why the Council has spent 3 centuries convincing the galaxy that you're nothing more than clever primitives. The truth about the last time dragons and humans stood together against the darkness between the stars. Outside the hidden chamber, the stellar wanderer continued its journey through the void, its Solarian crew unaware that their carefully maintained universe was about to change forever. In the depths of their own ship, a human mechanic worked with steady hands to free a creature of legend, while that creature prepared to speak truths that would shake the very foundations of galactic civilization. Marcus had always been good at fixing things. He was about to discover that sometimes the most important repairs were the ones that broke everything else apart first. The countdown timer on his communicator showed 18 minutes remaining before Captain Veltar expected his report. 18 minutes to free a dragon, challenge the Galactic Council, and potentially start a revolution that would span the stars. For a human mechanic who'd spent his entire adult life being called primitive by species that couldn't fix their own technology without his help, it seemed like a perfectly reasonable way to spend an afternoon. Marcus worked with a methodical precision that had kept him alive in some of the galaxy's most dangerous engine rooms. The energy chains binding Drakmorth operated on principles he recognized despite their alien origin. Resonance feedback loops maintained by quantum entanglement with the ship's power core. Complex, certainly, but not impossible to disrupt if you understood the underlying physics. The dragon watched in fascination as Marcus pulled tools from his kit that most species would consider primitive. Simple electromagnetic probes, basic circuit analyzers, even an old-fashioned multimeter that had belonged to his grandfather back on Earth. While other species relied on sophisticated AI systems and bio-integrated computers, humans had never quite abandoned their love affair with tools they could understand completely. "Your approach is unusual," Drakmorth observed as Marcus traced the energy patterns flowing through the nearest chain link. "Most species would begin with quantum resonance scans or probability field mapping. Most species think too complicated," Marcus replied, carefully inserting a probe into what appeared to be a solid bar of crystallized energy. "Sometimes the best way to break something is to figure out what it really wants to do naturally, then help it along." His readings confirmed what he'd suspected. The chains weren't just prison bonds. They were also a form of life support system, regulating the dragon's biological processes and maintaining a careful balance of energies that kept Drakmorth alive, but powerless. Breaking them without killing their prisoner would require delicate work. Marcus's communicator buzzed. "Human." Captain Veltar's voice had gained an edge of real irritation. "You have 10 minutes remaining. I will not delay departure for your incompetence." "Understood, Captain," Marcus replied calmly, never pausing in his work. "The problem is more extensive than initially diagnosed, but I'm implementing a solution." That was technically true. The problem was definitely more extensive than anyone had imagined, and freeing a legendary dragon certainly counted as implementing a solution, even if it wasn't the one Veltar expected. "Tell me about the truth you mentioned," Marcus said as he began the delicate process of rewiring the ship's power distribution network. "What don't they want the galaxy to remember about humans?" Drakmorth's massive head tilted, ancient eyes studying the human with what might have been surprise. "You work to free me, yet you don't know why your own species is feared? How fascinating. They have been more thorough than I imagined." Marcus paused in his work, looking up at the dragon. "Feared? Nobody fears humans. We're the new kids in galactic civilization. Most species barely tolerate us, and that's when they're being polite." The dragon's laugh was like rocks grinding together in the deep places of the world. "Oh, my dear engineer, you have been fed such beautiful lies. Do you know how long ago your species first reached the stars?" "About 300 years, Marcus replied automatically. The colony ship New Horizons launched in 2387, made first contact with the Centauri Trade Collective in 2391. And what do you know of Earth's history before that momentous achievement?" Marcus shrugged, returning his attention to the power coupling he was carefully disassembling. "The usual. Wars, environmental problems, social upheaval. We almost destroyed ourselves a couple of times before we got our act together enough for interstellar travel. What if I told you that wasn't the first time humanity reached the stars?" The simple sentence hit Marcus like a physical blow. His hands stilled on the delicate electronics, and he looked up sharply at Drakmorth. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the species known as humans has been traveling between the stars for over 10,000 years. I mean that your ancestors once built an empire that spanned half the galaxy. I mean that the Galactic Council exists primarily to ensure that humanity never remembers what it once was." Marcus sat back on his heels, his mind reeling. "That's impossible. There's no evidence of any earlier human civilization. No ruins, no technology, no records that they allow to survive," Drakmorth corrected gently. "No ruins that they haven't destroyed or claimed belong to other species. No technology that they haven't carefully eliminated from the archaeological record. Tell me, Marcus Chun, in all your travels across the galaxy, have you ever wondered why human intuition works so well with alien technology?" The question struck home. Marcus had always been better at fixing things than the instruction manuals suggested he should be. Give him an engine he'd never seen before, built by a species whose language he couldn't speak, and somehow he'd figure out what was wrong. Other human mechanics reported the same phenomenon. They called it intuition, or experience, or just getting lucky. What if it isn't intuition at all? Drakmorth continued. What if human minds recognize the technology because humans designed the fundamental principles that all modern galactic technology is based upon? Marcus's hands were shaking as he returned to his work, but his mind was racing faster than his fingers. It would explain so much. The way human-built tools somehow worked better than their specifications suggested. The fact that every major breakthrough in galactic technology over the past 3 centuries had come from human innovation, even though the credit always went to other species who refined human ideas into workable solutions. "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would they do this to us?" "Because the last time humanity remembered what it was capable of, we nearly broke the galaxy in half." Marcus's communicator crackled again, but this time it wasn't Captain Veltar. The voice was deeper, colder, and spoke in the formal tones of Galactic Council authority. "Attention, unregistered personnel. You are operating in a restricted area aboard a Council-sanctioned vessel. Identify yourself immediately and state your purpose." Marcus exchanged a look with Drakmorth. The dragon's expression was grimly amused. "It seems they've noticed your activities. The containment field has monitoring systems that alert the Council when someone attempts to access my prison. Council Authority Ship Divine Justice. This is Marcus Chun, licensed mechanic working under contract to repair the Stellar Wanderer's power systems." Marcus replied, continuing his work even as he spoke. "I was directed to this section by diagnostic readings indicating a critical power drain." There was a pause. Then The voice returned with a note of suspicion. Mechanic Shun, you will cease all activities in that section immediately and report to the main engineering deck. A council inspection team will arrive within the hour to escort you from the premises. Marcus looked at his chronometer. He had perhaps 6 minutes before Captain Veltar expected his report, and now less than an hour before council enforcers arrived to drag him away. The power coupling modifications were almost complete, but he still needed to create the feedback loop that would overload the containment system. Drakmorth, he said quietly. Once these chains are broken, what happens? Where do you go? First, I heal, the dragon replied. These bonds have drained my strength for longer than most species have been spacefaring. Then, I remember. And then, the ancient eyes gleamed with something that might have been anticipation. Then I teach. There are others like you, Marcus, scattered across the galaxy. Humans who have begun to suspect that the official history doesn't quite add up. Engineers and scientists and pilots who have noticed that they can do things they shouldn't be able to do, understand principles they were never taught. How many others? More than the Council suspects, fewer than we need. But enough to begin the awakening, if they can be brought together. Enough to start asking the right questions about why human innovation consistently outpaces human education, why human intuition works with technologies we supposedly never developed. Marcus's hands moved with increasing urgency as he connected the final components of his improvised overload system. The ship's power grid was now configured to send a precisely timed electromagnetic pulse through the containment field, creating a resonance cascade that would shatter the quantum locks holding the energy chains in place. There's something else you should know, Drakmorth said softly. The Council's fear of humanity isn't entirely unjustified. The last human empire, the one they worked so hard to erase, it fell because we became something that terrified even ourselves. We reached too far, learned too much, tried to reshape reality itself according to our will. When the end came, it came because we chose it rather than become monsters. Marcus paused in his work, looking up at the dragon. What kind of monsters? The kind that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics on a whim. The kind that could create or destroy entire star systems with a thought. The kind that could transcend mortality, space, and time itself. We were becoming gods, Marcus, and gods are not kind of lesser beings. The weight of that revelation settled over Marcus like a lead blanket. If what Drakmorth was saying was true, then humanity's current position as galactic underdogs wasn't just the result of council manipulation. It was a choice made by their own ancestors to prevent a catastrophe that would have consumed everything. So why wake us up? Marcus asked. If we're that dangerous, maybe it's better if we stay ignorant. Drakmorth's expression grew solemn. Because ignorance will not protect you much longer. The galaxy faces threats that require the kind of innovative thinking only humans possess. The Council has managed to suppress human potential for 3 centuries, but they cannot hold back the tide forever. The choice now is whether humanity awakens to its heritage gradually, with guidance and wisdom, or whether it awakens suddenly, in the face of a crisis that requires everything your species once was. Marcus completed the final connection and stepped back from his improvised overload device. It wasn't pretty, a collection of jury-rigged components and salvage electronics that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard rather than a spaceship. But it would work. The power surge would travel through the ship's electrical grid, hit the containment field at precisely the right frequency, and create a feedback loop that would shatter the quantum bonds holding Drakmorth prisoner. How do I survive the energy discharge? Marcus asked, checking his chronometer again. 3 minutes until Captain Veltar expected his report. You don't, Drakmorth said simply. Not as you are, but dragons have certain capabilities that extend beyond the physical realm. If you're willing to trust me completely, I can protect you during the transition. Though you should understand that you won't be quite the same afterward. Marcus thought about his life as it existed now, moving from ship to ship, fixing problems for species that looked down on him, scratching out a living on the margins of a civilization that considered him barely more intelligent than a trained animal. He thought about the other humans he'd met in his travels, all of them displaying flashes of brilliance that they themselves didn't quite understand, all of them settling for less than they were capable of because they'd been taught that less was all they deserved. "What would I become?" he asked. "Yourself," Drakmorth replied. "But yourself as you were meant to be before the Council's conditioning limited your potential. The process is difficult to explain. Dragons and humans have been connected since both species first looked up at the stars. Freeing me will awaken something in you that has been sleeping for 300 years. Marcus's communicator buzzed with an incoming call from Captain Veltar, but he ignored it. Instead, he placed his hand on the activation switch for his improvised overload device. "One more question," he said. "Are there other dragons out there? Other prisoners the Council is hiding?" Drakmorth's smile was fierce and full of terrible promise. "Oh yes, my dear engineer. Dragons do not travel alone, and we have very long memories. Free me, and you begin a process that will shake the Council to its very foundations. They have worked for centuries to keep our species apart, because they know what we can accomplish together." Marcus took a deep breath, thinking of every condescending comment, every species-based insult, every time he'd been told that humans weren't smart enough or advanced enough to understand something that he'd figured out in minutes. He thought of all the other humans out there, living diminished lives because they'd been convinced they were primitives in a galaxy of their superiors. "Time to fix what's broken," Marcus said, and threw the switch. The explosion of light and sound that followed would have killed any normal human instantly. But Marcus Chun was about to discover that normal humans were a myth created by those who feared what humanity could become when it stopped believing in its own limitations. The energy discharge was beyond anything Marcus had ever experienced. Reality seemed to fracture around him as the quantum locks holding Drakmorth's chains collapsed in a cascade of impossible light. The wave of energy that erupted from the breaking bonds should have reduced Marcus to component atoms, but instead it flowed through him like liquid fire, awakening pathways in his mind that he hadn't known existed. Through the blazing torrent of power, he felt Drakmorth's consciousness touch his own, ancient, vast, and reassuringly solid. The dragon's mental presence wrapped around Marcus's awareness like protective armor, shielding him from the worst of the energy storm while something fundamental shifted inside his human brain. Memories that weren't his own flooded through Marcus's consciousness. Images of Earth as it had been 10,000 years ago. Not the scarred, overcrowded world of historical records, but a planet covered in gleaming cities that rose like crystal spires toward the stars. Ships that moved between galaxies as easily as driving to the next town. Humans who manipulated matter and energy with casual expertise, who spoke to the quantum foam itself and commanded it to reshape reality according to their will. And dragons, always dragons, flying alongside human starships, their consciousness linked to human minds in partnerships that transcended individual mortality. Together, the two species had built wonders that made the current Galactic Council's greatest achievements look like primitive cave paintings. The vision shattered as the last of the energy chains dissolved, and Marcus found himself on his knees in the hidden chamber, gasping for air that tasted of ozone and possibilities. His scanner, which had been forgotten on the floor, was now a puddle of melted components. The emergency lighting flickered wildly before stabilizing, and in that strobing illumination, Marcus watched Drakmorth stretch wings that could have covered a small building. "How do you feel?" the dragon asked, his voice now carrying harmonics that Marcus could hear with senses he'd never possessed before. Marcus stood slowly, testing his balance. Everything felt different, sharper, more real, as if he'd been living his entire life with a filter over his perceptions that had suddenly been removed. He could see the energy patterns flowing through the ship's systems, feel the gravitational currents of nearby stellar bodies, sense the quantum fluctuations that held matter itself together. "I feel like I've been blind my whole life," Marcus said, his voice coming out steadier than he expected. "And like I'm finally seeing clearly." The awakening, Drakmorth nodded approvingly. The Council's conditioning suppresses these abilities in human children before they can fully develop. It takes considerable energy to break through decades of imposed limitations, which is why freeing me was necessary. Dragons serve as catalysts for human potential. We always have. Marcus's enhanced senses suddenly detected something that made his blood run cold. Ships were approaching the Stellar Wanderer at impossible speed, their engines leaving distortions in space-time that spoke of technology far beyond anything the Zolarians possessed. Council enforcement vessels, moving with the kind of urgency that suggested they knew exactly what had just happened. "We have company," Marcus said, his new awareness automatically calculating intercept courses and tactical options with a fluency that shocked him. Drakmorth's expression darkened. 6 ships, fully armed, with enough firepower to reduce this vessel to constituent atoms. "They're not here to arrest us, Marcus. They're here to eliminate any evidence that this conversation ever took place." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Captain Veltar and his crew, whatever their faults, were about to become collateral damage in the Council's effort to maintain their carefully constructed version of galactic history. Innocent beings who had no idea what cargo they'd been carrying were going to die simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Can we get them out?" Marcus asked, his mind already racing through the ship's specifications, calculating evacuation routes and escape possibilities. "Not all of them," Drakmorth said grimly. "The Council ships will lock down the Stellar Wanderer the moment they arrive. Standard procedure is to board, eliminate any witnesses, then destroy the vessel and claim it was lost to mechanical failure." Marcus felt something hot and angry rising in his chest, a fury that burned with intensity that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his own emotional responses. The sensation was both foreign and familiar, as if he was remembering how to feel an emotion he'd forgotten he possessed. "No," Marcus said, the word coming out with more force than he'd intended. "I won't let innocent people die, because the Council wants to keep their secrets." Drakmorth's eyes gleamed with approval. "Now you begin to understand why your species was once feared." That response, that absolute refusal to accept injustice even when fighting it seems hopeless, that is the essence of human nature that the Council has spent 3 centuries trying to suppress. Marcus was already moving, his enhanced awareness showing him exactly what needed to be done. The ship's communication system would let him warn the crew, but they'd never be able to escape in time through normal means. However, with his newly awakened abilities, he could see possibilities that hadn't existed minutes before. "I need to get to the main engineering section," Marcus said. "Can you make it there without being detected?" "My dear engineer," Drakmorth replied with something that might have been amusement, "I've been traveling unseen through the spaces between spaces since before your son was born. Lead the way." Marcus ran through the corridors of the Stellar Wanderer with Drakmorth, somehow managing to follow despite the dragon's massive size. His enhanced senses showed him exactly how Drakmorth was accomplishing this impossible feat. The dragon was partially phasing through dimensions, existing in several quantum states simultaneously, taking up no more physical space than necessary, while maintaining his essential presence. The ability to perceive such things should have been mind-bending, but Marcus found that his awakened consciousness processed the information naturally. It was like remembering how to use a tool he'd once been expert with, muscle memory returning after a long absence. They reached the main engineering deck, just as Marcus's communicator erupted with frantic chatter. Captain Veltar's voice cut through the noise, tight with barely controlled panic. "All stations, we have multiple contacts approaching at combat speed. Unknown vessels, military configuration, not responding to hails. All crew to emergency stations immediately." Marcus ignored the communicator and went straight to the ship's primary power distribution center. The Stellar Wanderer's fusion reactor was a standard Zolarian design, efficient but limited by the species' conservative approach to energy management. With his enhanced understanding, Marcus could see dozens of ways to optimize the system, to push it far beyond its supposed safe operating parameters. What are you planning? Drakmorth asked, watching as Marcus began rapidly reconfiguring the power grid with a speed and precision that would have been impossible for an unawakened human. Something that's going to shock a lot of people. Marcus replied, his hands moving in precise patterns across control surfaces that seemed to respond to his touch in ways that defied their original programming. Starting with showing the Council exactly what happens when you back humans into a corner. The fusion reactor began to hum with frequencies that its Zalarian designers had never intended. Marcus was pushing the system into resonance patterns that would increase power output by several orders of magnitude, while somehow maintaining perfect stability. It was the kind of intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics that the Council insisted humans were incapable of developing. Marcus, Drakmorth said quietly, what you're attempting will reveal our presence to every sensor in the system. The Council will know immediately that a human has undergone awakening. Good, Marcus replied, not pausing in his work. I'm tired of hiding what we're capable of. They remembered why they were afraid of us in the first place. The ship's lights flickered as the modified fusion system came online, and Marcus felt the stellar wanderer respond to power levels that should have torn it apart. Instead, the vessel seemed to come alive, its biometallic hull singing with harmonies that spoke of potential finally being fulfilled. Marcus opened a communication channel to the entire ship. Captain Veltar, this is Marcus Chun. I need you to listen very carefully and follow my instructions exactly. In approximately 30 seconds, this ship is going to do something that every Zalarian engineer will tell you is impossible. When it happens, don't fight the controls. Let the ship find its own course. Human, what are you doing? Veltar's voice carried a note of genuine fear. The power readings from engineering are beyond redline. I'm fixing your ship, Marcus replied, making the final connections that would transform the Stellar Wanderer from a simple merchant vessel into something that could challenge the Council's finest warships. And, in the process, I'm going to save everyone aboard from becoming collateral damage in someone else's war. The Council ships had arrived, and were moving into attack formation. Marcus could sense their targeting systems locking onto the Stellar Wanderer, feel the weapons charging that would reduce the merchant vessel to expanding plasma in moments. Through his enhanced perception, he could also sense the crews aboard those ships, beings following orders they didn't understand, convinced they were protecting galactic stability by eliminating a threat that most of them couldn't even identify. Drakmorth, Marcus said softly, are you ready to remind the galaxy what dragons and humans can accomplish together? The ancient creature's smile revealed teeth like crystallized starlight. I have been ready for this moment for 3 centuries, my friend. Let us show them that some bonds cannot be broken, no matter how hard they try. Marcus placed his hands on the ship's control interfaces, feeling the enhanced fusion reactor respond to his will as if the machinery itself had been waiting for a human touch to unlock its true potential. Power flowed through the Stellar Wanderer in patterns that rewrote the fundamental limitations the Zalarians had built into their own technology. And, in a hidden chamber deep within the ship, reality began to shift as a dragon who remembered everything prepared to teach the galaxy some very old truths about what happened when humanity stopped pretending to be primitive. The Council Enforcement Fleet was about to discover that their centuries-long campaign to keep humans ignorant of their own nature had one critical flaw. Some awakenings, once begun, could not be stopped. The transformation of the Stellar Wanderer began with a sound that no Zalarian ship had ever made, a deep, harmonic resonance that seemed to emerge from the vessel's very structure. Throughout the ship, crew members stopped what they were doing and stared in amazement as their familiar surroundings began to change. The biometallic hull, which had always possessed a subtle organic quality, suddenly came alive with patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with the modified fusion reactor. Corridors that had been merely functional became things of beauty, their walls flowing with energy patterns that seemed to respond to the emotions and thoughts of those who walked through them. On the bridge, Captain Veltar watched his instruments with growing disbelief as impossible readings cascaded across his displays. Engineering efficiency, 430%, his first officer reported, his scaled features pale with shock. Structural integrity, holding at, this can't be right. The readings suggest our hull is now stronger than military-grade armor plating. Impossible, Veltar whispered, but his instruments didn't lie. The merchant vessel he'd commanded for 20 years was transforming into something that belonged in the most classified corners of Council military research facilities. Deep in the engineering section, Marcus felt the ship respond to his touch like a living thing. His enhanced consciousness had merged partially with the vessel's systems, allowing him to optimize every component, every energy flow, every quantum field fluctuation with an intuitive understanding that went beyond engineering training into something approaching art. The Council ships are targeting us, Drakmorth observed, his massive presence somehow fitting comfortably in the engineering bay despite the apparent impossibility of the geometry. Their weapons are charging. Marcus nodded, his awareness extending beyond the ship to encompass the tactical situation developing around them. 6 Council enforcement vessels in standard attack formation, their crews following protocols designed to eliminate threats quickly and quietly. In their certainty, in their absolute conviction that they were dealing with primitive technology operated by inferior beings, they had made a critical error. They had given Marcus time to work. Captain Veltar, Marcus said into the ship's communication system, in about 10 seconds, you're going to have full maneuvering control returned to you. When that happens, I need you to trust me and execute the navigation commands that will appear on your tactical display. Human, this is madness, Veltar replied, but Marcus could hear something in the Zalarian's voice that hadn't been there before. Not just fear, but a growing sense of wonder at what his ship had become. The lead Council vessel fired first, a concentrated beam of coherent energy that should have vaporized the stellar wanderer instantly. Instead, the beam struck a barrier that hadn't existed moments before, a field of crystallized space-time that Marcus had somehow woven around the ship using principles that officially didn't exist. The energy weapon, designed to penetrate any known defensive system, simply dissolved into harmless photons that the ship's transformed hull absorbed and converted into additional power for its already impossible systems. What in the void was that? Came a transmitted voice from one of the Council ships, the disciplined calm of military communications giving way to genuine shock. Marcus smiled, feeling power flow through him in ways that made him understand why the Council had worked so hard to keep humans ignorant. This wasn't just enhanced engineering capability. This was the ability to impose human will directly onto reality itself, to convince the universe to operate according to human expectations rather than alien limitations. Drakmorth, Marcus said, I think it's time to introduce ourselves properly. The dragon's response was felt rather than heard, a mental touch that somehow amplified Marcus's own awakened abilities. Together, their consciousness reached out beyond the ship, touching the minds of every being in the surrounding fleet with a communication that bypassed technology entirely. To the crews of the Council enforcement vessels, Marcus's voice echoed directly in the minds of hundreds of alien beings. You are attacking innocent civilians on the orders of those who have lied to you about the nature of the threat you face. We offer you one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. The response was immediate and predictable. 5 more energy weapons fired simultaneously, their combined output enough to crack the crust of a small planet. All 5 beams struck the Stellar Wanderer's impossible defenses and were absorbed as harmlessly as the first. I didn't think they'd listen, Marcus sighed, then opened a communication channel to Captain Veltar. Captain, execute evasive maneuvers. And don't worry about the structural stress warnings. This ship can handle anything you can throw at now. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration. The Stellar Wanderer, transformed by human intuition and dragon wisdom into something that transcended the limitations of its original design, moved through space with an elegance that made the Council's military vessels look clumsy by comparison. Marcus guided the ship through impossible maneuvers, using gravitational fields as launching points, bending space-time to allow near-instantaneous course changes that should have reduced everyone aboard to component atoms. Instead, the ship's transformed systems somehow maintained perfect internal stability while dancing between enemy weapons' fire like a leaf on the wind. "This is impossible," transmitted the lead Council ship's commander. "No known technology can produce these results. Identify yourselves immediately, or we will escalate to maximum force." Maximum force against a merchant vessel? Drakmorth's voice joined the mental communication, carrying undertones that spoke of age and power beyond mortal comprehension. How very like the Council to threaten genocide when faced with something they don't understand. "Dragon," the transmitted voice cracked with recognition and terror. "Report your status immediately. How have you broken free of containment?" "With help from a friend," Drakmorth replied, amusement coloring his mental voice. "Perhaps you should ask your superiors why they thought it wise to transport dragons aboard ships crewed by species they consider inferior. Did they not consider that someone might eventually ask inconvenient questions about the power drain required to maintain our prisons?" Marcus was monitoring the Council ship's communications, and what he was hearing confirmed his worst suspicions about the scope of the conspiracy they'd uncovered. The enforcement fleet's commander was receiving frantic transmissions from Council headquarters, orders to eliminate all evidence of the situation regardless of civilian casualties. "Captain Veltar," Marcus said urgently, "I'm transmitting coordinates to your navigation system. Set course immediately and prepare for emergency jump." "Emergency jump?" Veltar's voice reached new heights of disbelief. "We're too deep in the system's gravity well. The stress would tear us apart." "Not anymore," Marcus replied, feeling the ship's enhanced systems respond to his will. "Trust me, Captain. We're about to do something that will definitely get their attention." What Marcus was planning wasn't just impossible by current galactic engineering standards. It was something that the most advanced civilizations insisted was a violation of fundamental physical laws. But, with his awakened abilities and Drakmorth's ancient knowledge guiding him, Marcus could see exactly how to convince reality that those laws were merely suggestions. The stellar wanderer began to gather energy in patterns that made the surrounding space-time shiver with anticipation. Traditional faster-than-light travel required careful positioning at specific gravitational balance points, precise calculations, and gradual acceleration through multiple dimensional phases. What Marcus was about to do was grab space-time by the throat and force it to cooperate. "All Council vessels, this is your final warning," Marcus transmitted to the enforcement fleet. "Stand down immediately or face the consequences." The response was a coordinated barrage of every weapon the 6 ships could bring to bear. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, gravitational disruptors, enough firepower to sterilize a continent. All of it struck the stellar wanderer's defenses and was absorbed, converted, and redirected into the ship's impossible energy systems. "Thank you," Marcus said politely. "We needed that extra power for what comes next." Reality twisted around the stellar wanderer as Marcus engaged systems that shouldn't have existed, using principles that the Council insisted were impossible. The ship didn't just enter faster-than-light travel. It stepped sideways through dimensions, moving from one point in space to another without bothering to cross the intervening distance. When the dimensional distortions cleared, the stellar wanderer was hanging in space 3 light hours away from the enforcement fleet, completely beyond their sensor range. But, more importantly, Marcus had done something that would send shockwaves through every scientific institution in the galaxy. He had just performed instantaneous, faster-than-light travel from deep within a gravity well, using technology that every species insisted was theoretically impossible. "Where are we?" Captain Veltar asked, his voice hoarse with shock. "Safe," Marcus replied. "For now. But, Captain, I need you to understand something. After what just happened, there's no going back to the way things were. The Council will hunt this ship and everyone aboard it to the ends of the galaxy." Through the ship's enhanced sensors, Marcus could detect the Council fleet's frantic attempts to locate them. More ships were being deployed, and emergency communications were flooding subspace with reports of impossible technology and confirmed dragon escape. However, Drakmorth added, his mental voice carrying notes of ancient satisfaction. They're no longer hunting a helpless merchant vessel and a single awakened human. Word of what happened here will spread, despite their best efforts to contain it. Other humans will hear the stories, will begin to question what they've been told about their own limitations. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling over him like a cloak. He'd freed a dragon, awakened his own dormant abilities, and demonstrated technology that challenged the very foundations of galactic civilization's understanding of physics. Now came the hard part, figuring out what to do with the revolution he'd accidentally started. Drakmorth, Marcus said quietly, you mentioned there were others, humans who were beginning to suspect the truth. How do we find them? The dragon's smile was visible in the harmonics of his mental voice. Oh, my dear engineer, finding them won't be the problem. After what we've just accomplished, they'll find us. The communications began arriving within hours of their escape, encrypted transmissions that somehow found the stellar wanderer despite its location in deep space between star systems. Each message followed the same pattern. Humans across the galaxy who had felt something change, who had experienced moments of impossible clarity, who suddenly found themselves capable of feats that their training insisted were beyond their abilities. Marcus read each transmission with growing amazement and concern. A human engineer on Kepler Station who had somehow repaired a quantum reactor using techniques that didn't exist in any manual. A pilot in the Vega system who had managed to navigate through a solar storm that should have been impossible to survive. A researcher on Earth who had suddenly understood alien mathematical concepts that had puzzled xenobiologists for decades. The awakening spreads, Drakmorth observed, his massive presence somehow comfortable in the stellar wanderer as transformed engineering bay. When one human breaks free of the Council's conditioning, it creates ripples that affect others of your species. This is why they feared our partnership so deeply. Captain Veltar appeared on the engineering deck, his usually pristine uniform disheveled, and his scaled features showing signs of stress that Marcus had never seen before. The Zalarian moved carefully, as if he wasn't entirely sure his own ship wouldn't suddenly decide to operate according to physics he didn't understand. Human, Veltar said, his voice carrying none of its usual condescension. We need to discuss our situation. My crew is terrified. My ship has been transformed into something that violates everything we know about engineering, and the Galactic Council has declared us enemies of civilized space. Marcus looked up from the communication console, where he'd been tracking the growing network of awakened humans. Captain, I understand your concerns, but right now, we're all in the same situation. The Council will eliminate anyone who knows what happened here, regardless of species. Then, what do you propose we do? Veltar asked, and Marcus was surprised to realize the question was genuine. The Zalarian captain was actually asking a human for advice, treating him as an equal rather than a useful tool. We survive, Marcus replied simply. And while we're surviving, we help others do the same. Every human who awakens to their true potential is another crack in the Council's carefully constructed facade. Eventually, there'll be too many cracks for them to seal. A new transmission arrived, this one carrying priority routing that made Marcus's enhanced senses tingle with recognition. The encryption was different, older, using quantum patterns that felt familiar despite being technology he'd never encountered before. Marcus Chon of Earth, the message began. This is Commander Sarah Liu of the merchant vessel New Horizons. If what we're hearing is true, if you've actually freed one of the ancient ones and undergone awakening, then you need to know that you're not alone. The transmission continued with coordinates for a meeting point in the neutral zone, a region of space claimed by no government where the Council's authority was limited. But what caught Marcus's attention was the ship's name. New Horizons was the same designation as humanity's first colony ship, the vessel that had supposedly carried humans to the stars for the first time 3 centuries ago. Drakmorth, Marcus said quietly, is it possible that some humans never forgot? That there were survivors from the original empire who preserved the truth? The dragon's mental touch carried notes of hope mixed with ancient sadness. It's possible. When the end came, when your ancestors chose to step back from godhood rather than become monsters, not all of them agreed with that choice. Some may have hidden themselves, preserved their knowledge, waited for the right moment to reveal what they knew. Marcus made his decision with the same rapid intuition that had guided him through decades of engineering challenges. Captain Veltar, I'm plotting a course for the neutral zone. We have a chance to meet others who might have answers about what's really happening. And if it's a trap? Veltar asked. Then, we face it together, Marcus replied. But I don't think it is. Something tells me that the universe is finally ready for humanity to remember what it once was. The journey to the meeting coordinates took 3 days, during which Marcus worked with Drakmorth to understand the full scope of his newly awakened abilities. The dragon served as both teacher and guide, helping Marcus explore capabilities that went far beyond enhanced engineering intuition. He learned to perceive the quantum underpinnings of reality directly, to sense the probability streams that flowed through space-time like invisible rivers. He discovered that human consciousness, when properly awakened, could interface with those probability streams and guide them toward desired outcomes. It wasn't magic, it was applied quantum mechanics at a level that most species couldn't even conceive of attempting. Your ancestors called it technological empathy, Drakmorth explained during one of their training sessions. The ability to understand and communicate with any artificial system, regardless of its origin or complexity. Dragons possess similar abilities, but focused on natural systems, the fundamental forces that govern reality itself. And together, our species could reshape the galaxy according to principles of justice and wisdom rather than fear and control. Which is exactly why the Council worked so hard to keep us apart. When they arrived at the meeting coordinates, Marcus found himself staring at a sight that challenged even his expanding understanding of the possible. Floating in the void between stars was a structure that defied classification. Part space station, part starship, part something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the standard 3. The New Horizons was docked at the structure, along with dozens of other vessels that Marcus's enhanced senses recognized as fundamentally transformed ships. Each one had been awakened in the same way as the Stellar Wanderer, their original limitations transcended by human intuition working in harmony with alien technology. Welcome to Haven, came a transmission from the structure. This is Commander Liu. Permission to come aboard. Marcus found himself standing in a docking bay that shouldn't have fit inside the structure's apparent dimensions, facing a woman whose eyes held the same depth of awareness that he'd seen in his own reflection since the awakening. Commander Sarah Liu was clearly human, but there was something about her that spoke of age and experience far beyond her apparent years. So, she said with a slight smile, you're the mechanic who started a revolution by fixing the wrong problem. I prefer to think I fixed exactly the problem that needed fixing, Marcus replied. Liu laughed, a sound that carried harmonics of genuine joy. Fair enough. Come with me. There are some people you need to meet. What Marcus found in the depths of Haven challenged everything he thought he knew about recent galactic history. The structure contained a community of several thousand beings, humans who had never forgotten their true heritage, dragons who had escaped council imprisonment, and representatives of other species who had chosen to resist the council's authoritarian control. We've been waiting for 3 centuries, Liu explained as they walked through corridors that hummed with impossible technology. Waiting for the moment when enough humans would begin to awaken that we could safely reveal ourselves. What you did when you freed Drakmorth, that was the signal we'd been watching for. They entered a vast chamber where holographic displays showed real-time maps of the galaxy, tracking the spread of human awakenings and council response forces. Marcus was stunned to see how widespread the phenomenon had become in just a few days. Hundreds of humans across dozens of worlds were reporting enhanced abilities, impossible insights, and sudden understanding of technologies they'd never studied. The Council is mobilizing everything they have, Liu continued, gesturing to red indicators that showed military buildups throughout Council space. They know that once this process reaches critical mass, their ability to control galactic civilization will end. They're preparing for what they call the final protocol, the complete elimination of human populations throughout the galaxy. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Genocide. Genocide disguised as emergency disease control, Lou confirmed grimly. They'll claim that humans have been infected with some kind of alien pathogen that affects cognitive function. The cure, unfortunately, will be fatal in 100% of cases. Drakmorth's presence suddenly filled the chamber, the dragon having somehow navigated the station's corridors despite his massive size. The Council has played this game before, he said, his mental voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. When a species begins to approach transcendence, when they start to question the fundamental assumptions about reality that keep the Council in power, they are eliminated as a threat to galactic stability. How many? Marcus asked quietly. 7 species, over the past 10,000 years, Drakmorth replied. All of them showed the same pattern: rapid technological advancement, enhanced consciousness, the ability to perceive and manipulate reality in ways that challenge Council orthodoxy. All of them were declared extinct due to various convenient catastrophes. Marcus looked at the displays showing the growing network of awakened humans, then at the red indicators marking Council military preparations. The numbers were stark. A few thousand awakened humans scattered across the galaxy, facing the combined military might of dozens of alien civilizations. We can't win a conventional war, he said. No, Lou agreed. But we're not going to fight a conventional war. We're going to do something that the Council isn't prepared for, something that only humans working in partnership with dragons have ever accomplished. She gestured to another holographic display, this one showing what appeared to be a map of space-time itself, with flowing patterns that Marcus's enhanced senses recognized as the probability streams Drakmorth had taught him about. We're going to rewrite reality, Lou continued. Not just locally, not just for ourselves, but for the entire galaxy. We're going to create a universe where the Council's authoritarian control is literally impossible, where no species can dominate others through fear and deception. Marcus stared at the display, his awakened consciousness beginning to grasp the scope of what was being proposed. It wasn't just revolution. It was transformation at a level that would affect every conscious being in the galaxy. Can it be done? He asked. Drakmorth's mental presence carried notes of ancient determination mixed with hope. It was done once before, Marcus Chunivert. When your ancestors chose to step back from godhood, they didn't just abandon their power. They rewrote the fundamental laws governing consciousness and technology to prevent any species from achieving the kind of dominance they had wielded. The Council has spent 10,000 years slowly undoing those safeguards, Lou added, creating a universe where fear and control are more powerful than wisdom and cooperation. But now that humans are awakening again, now that we remember what we're truly capable of, we can restore what was lost. Marcus looked around the chamber at the faces watching him, human and alien alike, all of them unified by a vision of what the galaxy could become if freed from the Council's manipulation. He thought about Captain Veltar and his crew, good beings caught up in events beyond their understanding. He thought about all the humans across the galaxy who were just beginning to discover their true potential. What do you need me to do? Marcus asked. Lou's smile was fierce and full of promise. Help us wake up the galaxy, Marcus. One consciousness at a time, one awakening at a time, until there are too many of us for the Council to stop. Outside Haven, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that the balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift in ways that would echo through eternity. The age of Council dominance was ending, and the age of true cooperation between all conscious species was about to begin. All it had taken was one human mechanic who refused to accept that some problems couldn't be fixed, and a dragon who remembered that some partnerships transcend the boundaries of species, time, and space itself. The galaxy was about to learn that when humans and dragons work together, there was no force in the universe that could stand against them for long.